Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to go to Washington, D.C. and talk about nonviolence. I'm going to some people who've been through conflicts and have been able to do nonviolent struggle and succeed, actually, with a lot of good results. In Washington is Mubarak Awad, who is the leader, I guess, in something called Nonviolence International, which has groups in various parts of the world. But his first claim to fame came from organizing an intifada, I guess the first one, in Israel, Palestine, and for the people in Palestine. And so he's been doing nonviolence work ever since. Good morning, Mubarak. How are you?
Good morning. Good afternoon for everybody also.
It is afternoon.
I'm happy to be with you.
Okay. And also, someplace near him, because you're both in Washington, is Ivan Marovic. And Ivan is a Serbian, I presume, because I first knew of you as somebody who was a very important leader in the Otpor movement that actually was able to oust Milosevic some years ago, like 15 years ago now, isn't it? Something like that. And I guess you're living in the US now. How are you, Ivan?
I'm great, thank you. And it's good to be here today with you.
And you informed me of something that's very, I have to say, distressing news, which is that Peter Ackerman has died, and I didn't know that. Peter Ackerman is the founder of something called the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict, or on Nonviolent Conflict. I never remember which, but he was a very successful financial man. He made a lot of money managing people's money, and in Wall Street and so on. And he was also extremely committed to pursuing nonviolent means of conflict resolution, and set up this outfit, which I believe, Ivan, you're now working with. So I don't know where to start, but I mean, I was distressed to hear of Peter Ackerman's sudden passing, I guess from a heart attack.
Yes.
So
Yes, we are all sad. It happened unexpectedly. And maybe to say one thing, I recently joined ICNC. I have been collaborating with Peter and with others at ICNC for 2 decades now. This is how actually I met Mubarak Awad, through that connection, some like more than a decade ago. But I started, as I said, very recently working on implementing a framework for particular workshops to help dissidents strategize. And it's based on a book that Peter Ackerman published last year. So this is his magnum opus, the culmination of 50 years of his work, because he is a scholar of nonviolent action and civil resistance, apart from being a financier and a banker in his career. And so soon after the book was published, we started organizing these workshops. They went really well, and people were really responded positively to the framework. And then Peter passed away suddenly, and we are all sad because of that. But we are continuing the plan, and I think that we'll talk about it more. But the moment is, how shall I say, the civil resistance and nonviolent action is needed more than ever in the current moment. So
absolutely,
I strongly believe, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what was the name of this book? Because I'm not sure whether I've seen it or not.
Yeah, so the book is called The Checklist to End Tyranny, and I think I have one copy here.
Okay.
Yeah, here it is. So it just came out. Yeah. It came out like last year, and it provides this framework on like how to think about your struggle, your capabilities, the adversary, the conflict in general, and leads people through the process of like figuring out the weak spots, the opportunities, and things like that.
Okay, well, I have not seen the book, but I did interview him several years ago in his office in Washington, and he did talk about the idea of a checklist, which I thought was a smart way of organizing ideas, and he pointed out that in that a lot of advantages have come from just doing things like in hospitals, in operating rooms, they create checklists to make sure you haven't forgotten a sponge and left it in somebody or something. You just go through and make sure everything's done. Well, that's very systematic.
That's exactly the how should I say, the model that he applied in this book, so that dissidents don't forget a little detail that may come back and bite them later. So the checklist to end tyranny is actually series of steps that dissidents should take to kind of make a more formidable movement.
Well, Mubarak, did you ever have a checklist? You organized an awful lot of people. What is it now? It's about like 30 years ago, wasn't it, when you started this intifada?
No, I did not.
Okay.
And I really, I went after my finishing my education in the United States. I came from high school to go to college in the United States in Cleveland, Tennessee. And then I went for my master's degree and my PhD. But mostly I was interested in psychology and children and how to work with children, how to do counseling with children and their family.
Do you still focus on that at all? Because I don't remember hearing you talk about working with children.
I started a program in the United States called the National Youth Advocate Program, and we work with around 3,000 children a day.
Really?
And if you saw 2 years ago, the children who have been on the borders between Mexico and United States that have been taken away from their family, we are one of the organization, the Youth Advocate Program, that now we are taking the children, finding their parents, finding their grandparents or anybody. And we really placed around 900 of those children. And we still have to replace around 3,000 plus.
My God, I can't imagine so many still. I mean, it's just so, I cannot think of a more horrendous crime than ruining the lives of children, small children that way. You know, these kids have to be traumatized in ways that are going to be very lasting, right?
It's very much. And some of them, they were 3 years, 2 years old. And if you ask them, what's the name of your mom or your dad? They say mom and dad. And we have no clue. But with the help of the churches who are Latino churches in different areas in the United States and back in Nicaragua and in Mexico and all that thing, we were able to find the family or some parents of those children. And that's how we have been successful in making a difference in their life and bringing them back together.
Are they mostly in their own Latin American countries, or are they reunited in the United States?
Oh, we are working with those who are in the United States, who are waiting for asylum to stay in the United States, or the court gave them some time to see if their parents have been deported also, so they are in institutions here. So we take them out of the institution, we put them in foster homes to make more life easier for them. And then we have still to take them to court, an immigration court, to say, yes, we'll find a place for them, they can stay. And the judge have to say, okay, now they are working towards their citizenship over here in the United States.
But the parents, now are any of these, the children who were sent across the border by their parents on their own? Because I understand there were many kids crossing over, even though they had no adults with them.
That's right. So many times, but they have some paper, or sometimes they write a phone number or on their shirt or something. That's how we find out.
Mm.
And it's a tough life where they are coming from when so many of their parents or relatives have been killed by groups, or the violence is overwhelming those people, and that's why they are leaving to come to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been really blessed by finding a lot of Latinos that are willing and doing their best to find homes and ways how to help the other Latinos from different areas.
Mm-hmm. Do you keep in touch with these kids or try to provide any psychological therapy for them, to cope with this horrible experience?
No, we are not allowed to.
No?
No, we are not allowed. After we reunite them with the parents or grandparents or relatives, we are done. And we see that that's a problem because they need a continuation of services. But the government at this time, they're still refusing the continuing of services.
Why? What rationale would the government have? You'd think that, they would be doing everything humanly possible to make up for the crime they've committed.
The rationale is no rationale at all. Someone somehow on that group who are interested in the life of those people, they think because they are Latino, because they are not white, and because they come illegally or they did something wrong their parents did, then they have to suffer.
Well,
and we have to give them only
a cruel person could make the argument that the adults might have to be punished, and there's a logic, although it's not a very good logic. But there's nobody in the world who would say that it should be wreaked on the children. The children.
Well, we are not thinking that way. We are thinking that they are a burden on society, and we want them out of the country.
Well, they're going to be much more of a burden because of what happened.
Yeah.
It's obvious. Yeah.
So that's unfortunately, but we are doing our best, and we are very, very happy in what we are doing with them.
I bless you. That is just absolutely saintly of you. Maybe I'll ask Yvonne to share a little bit first about your adventures in Hatbahor and how you managed to actually overturn a government.
I actually never intended to be an activist. I was caught up like in a moment. It was a moment of decision for all of us. There was like a great injustice that was happening. And it was after years of conflict. And I mean, like, it was a violent conflict. It was a breakup of Yugoslavia, civil war, with like everything that the war brings. And of all the wars, the worst is the civil war, because this like pits neighbor against neighbor, like relative against relative. It's like really, really tough. And on top of that, it's a minor thing in a larger conflict, but there was a moment where the political opposition to Milosevic won local elections, which he couldn't take the victory of somebody else, even in the local elections for city council. And he annulled the vote. He just said, we're going to repeat it. And that kind of sparked the protest. And I, as one of the people who was on the margins, and, I voted, but I wasn't really politically involved. That was kind of, how should I say, a straw that broke the camel's back in my case. And I ended up protesting for 4 months with my colleagues against the election fraud and against the annulling of the elections. And that pretty much, didn't succeed in that protest, although some small gains were made, but it didn't succeed. But that actually connected me with a lot of other people. And we started thinking, how can we go beyond protest? What is it that we can do that is going to really, how should I say, make a difference? And there we discovered like movement building, we discovered civil resistance as a method, nonviolent action. And slowly what happened is that we built this movement, which was called Otpor, which means resistance in Serbian. And through Otpor, we managed to mobilize a great number of people in Serbia to stand up, to confront Milosevic and his regime. At the next elections, which happened 4 years later, we managed to unseat him in the election. He again tried to annul the elections and to kind of prevent the victory of the opposition candidate. But, you know, through series of strikes and boycotts and civil disobedience, we managed to force him out. And so this happened without a single shot fired, which is amazing because this was a butcher of the Balkans, guy responsible for 4 wars, and he was unseated peacefully, which nobody expected at the time. Everybody thought he's going to create a huge bloodshed and he's going to unleash hell on people who were protesting against him. Not that he didn't want to do that, he probably did, and it was, how should I say, something that he was used to doing. But the challenge that we kind of organized involved an open call to people who were on his side to defect, and a lot of members of the military and the police defected, and they refused to carry out orders to crush down the protesters and members of our movement, and he was left alone and he had to step down. So there is this like famous televised address where 10 days after the elections, he, how should I say, announced to the people that he just learned from the election commission that he had lost the election. And that he's going to spend his time playing, the rest of his days playing with his grandson. And so this came like 10 days after the elections, he finally learned. But actually it was after he tried everything to prevent his loss, and he failed on every instance. And that actually showed me how people can actually really change and shift power if they organize and if they use these methods of nonviolent action against a very formidable adversary like he was.
Okay, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is immediately I begin comparing what you were up against with what's going on in Russia today, because there certainly are people who'd like to change the policy of Putin. So I don't know how much of your situation could be adopted or attempted by those people there. For one thing, the first question is, how dangerous was it for you? And how dangerous would it be for them? I mean, there's a certain proportion of people, and it might be the majority, but I doubt it. I think probably the majority of people in Russia really right now are just acquiescing. They're passive. They don't even want to have an opinion. You know, I mean, as I understand it, they don't have any hope of being able to resist. And this is unfortunate, but it's certainly not surprising given the history, you know, the Russian history. But I don't know how violent his methods would be now to punish anybody who resists. So, and I don't know how dangerous it was for you. And then the other question is, how do people assess how much support there really is there for them? Because, you know, how did you know what proportion of the population in their hearts wanted to oppose Milosevic? And how would somebody in Russia be able to make such an estimation now?
Yeah, these are actually really good questions, and they cut to the heart of like what we were dealing with. So let me first make a comparison between Milosevic and Putin, and like both similarities and differences. First, the similarity is at the beginning of their rule, they quickly realized the power of nationalism and ethnic mobilization to prop up their rule. So both Milosevic and Putin were not originally nationalists. They are not, how shall I say, ideologues of like Russian supremacy or Serbian hegemony or anything like that. But they discovered that this thing really works if you want to maintain power. So that is an important similarity. Another important similarity is the mafia style of government, where it's not actually the institutions that are enforcing the, how should I say, wish of the ruler, but those shadowy mafia style networks that operate at the junction between secret police and organized crime. So usually it's one. Secret police and organized crime are one thing. And that is really, really interesting, because if you look at
Sorry, was that true in both countries, in Serbia
both countries, yeah, these are the similarities. So use of nationalism and the nature of the state, which is mafia style state, which if you look at like most people who were killed by Putin and most people who were killed by Milosevic at the time were not people who belonged to the opposition. Yes, famous opposition leaders were assassinated in both cases, and journalists, independent editors of independent newspapers, they were assassinated. But if you look at like the bulk of assassinations were people in the circle around Milosevic and Putin. And this is what makes them look like mafia. People who are thinking about like abandoning ship, they get killed easily. So back in the day in Belgrade, we used to have, on a weekly basis, CEOs of large companies, generals of the police or the army, they would get killed in the street, like mafia style, like Chicago 1930s, and dead in front of their home, or or in a restaurant or something like that. Putin is different. He uses there are a lot of suicides, people jumping out of windows. Like just recently, like managers of Gazprom and other oil companies, they just kept dying, jumping off windows. Then there is a lot of like poisoning that is happening. So you can see that similarity. This is how they rule. They rule through that shadowy mafia style secret police, that squads. It's not, how shall I say, visible on the surface, like in some other places where you have like the police and the courts like enforcing that. So this is the similarity. The difference, and I think this is where I think like Russia is in a way in a better position than Serbia. Is the difference is that Milosevic was like a real leader. People, like when he came to power, like he came into power on rallies, on mass mobilization, on people really believing in him. Putin came to power through like backroom deals. He's trying to create that popular support, but in his case, it's not really that deep. I think actually in his case, it's really shallow. People are more afraid of him than they believe in him. With Milosevic, there were a lot of people who really believed in him. There was even a poem that came up in the mid 80s that said like that Jesus Christ came down again like Slobodan Milosevic. So he is the reincarnation of Christ. So people were like really, how should I say, had those how should I say, really idolatry, we can say, like, or like cult-like behavior at the time, which in the case of Putin is not the case. And I think this is his biggest vulnerability, is that he doesn't have actually any real deep following in Russia.
I think the better comparison would be Trump.
Yes,
because there are people who, I don't know whether they call him Jesus Christ. He's not very saintly, but
there are so many similarities there, because there is a genuine following. It may be a fringe. It may be a too radicalized group of people, but it is genuine.
Yeah.
And in that sense, that is the big difference. I think that Putin's rule is mostly ruled through fear, and ruled through conformity, and ruled through apathy. But that small sliver of the population that really believes in him is not there. And I think if we look at how this might end in the case of Serbia, it could easily. This is why for us civil resistance and nonviolent action was very important, because we knew that there is a part of the population that if violence is introduced, they would fight, and they actually would how should I say, die for their leader. I'm not sure that in Russia anybody is willing to die for Putin. And I think, as I said, his support, in my belief, is maybe wide but shallow.
Well, I think that sounds very convincing to me. But I really have so much trouble understanding the mentality of people who are these shallow people who many, I don't mean to denigrate them, because I have many Russian friends. I wrote a book about Russia, so I've spent in the past, I used to go to Russia every year, and I do have a lot of contacts in the past, but my goodness, they are not going to, very few of them are dissidents, and they're not going to go into that. Mm-hmm. And yet, when I would talk to them about politics, they were all in favor of democracy, but my country, right or wrong, I think is pretty much where they are now. So it's sort of like what happened after the Arab Spring. It's one thing to get the keys to the palace. It's another thing to know what to do the next day when you have to organize a real government. And I think, and here's where I kind of disagree with Gene Sharp, because he and I talked about that once. When I was saying, I think before people start creating a nonviolent revolution to get rid of a dictator, they better have a pretty good plan already made about what they're going to do the next day. And he didn't seem to think that was his business. His business was just to show people how to get rid of the dictator. And he didn't think that anything else was essential. I don't know about that. What do you think?
I agree. I think that, knowing, if you don't know where you're going, then every distraction looks like a direction sign. So people who don't have a plan beforehand easily get caught up in unimportant things after the transition, after the revolution. Mm-hmm. So let's take the Arab Spring, for instance. When they removed dictators, for instance, in Egypt or in Tunisia, or in any country, there are still certain institutions that remained that wanted to bring back dictatorship, and they wanted to, reverse the trend. And if you don't understand that, and if you don't have the plan how to actually rein in those institutions, how to create civilian oversight, how to create democratic control of these institutions, they're going to constantly undermine the new thing from within. So you cannot say that the struggle is over once you remove the dictator, because the dictator is just, a personality on top of a structure that is deeply ingrained in the society, that was running the state for so long. Actually, reforming those institutions is essential part of the whole struggle. So the struggle cannot stop with the removal of the regime. Regime should be just seen as an obstacle that needs to be removed so that the real work of reform of the system could start. Exactly.
Does Mubarak agree? And by the way, I, in mentioning Gene Sharp, I could be just, inaccurate. So if you think that I'm not reporting what you understand him to have believed, correct me. but also I'd like to know whether what your own view is.
I think he have the idea that in a revolutionary type, that still people have to make a decision. And he was so interested in the concept of democracy that after that people will vote and then life will be okay. But after the spring didn't work well with life is okay. They became more dictators and they start learning how to protect themselves more, being tyrants and worse tyrants than the previous one. But I also want to add one thing also, that Ivan, he have a local inside the conflict between the group and between the leaders, and he want to make a change. I mean, he have against people who are family, who are groups, teachers, who are soldiers, who are part of his everything. For us, it's easier for the Palestinians. I mean, we know who's the oppressor. We know who is the ones who are taking our land and who occupy us. So we know the faces, we know a different language, a different dress, a different culture, different thing. So it's easier for us to know what is the other side doing and thinking. But for them, they have to be very quick and very smart in checking everything more than us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Where do you stand now with the notion of being able to make some changes in the relations between Palestine and Israel with another attempt through nonviolent struggle?
I think the First Intifada, which was a great experiment in the Palestinian history and also in the whole Arab world, that you could really make a difference, and it doesn't matter how strong your enemy is. And the idea of having 5 million Palestinians to be directed, to be oppressed, to be occupied by the Israeli. And it's a psychological concept, which I am always in a psychology that I told Palestinian, we are under occupation because we choose to be under occupation. I'm a Rogerian psychologist follower, that whatever we do, we choose to do it. And this really, when I start opening the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence, it is the training, it is the writing, it is the lectures, it is the workshops, and then it is telling people that we can do it, that we don't need help from the outside. We don't need help from the Arab world, from anybody. We can do it. Our number is there. And as Ivan said, it's the young people that we mobilized, and they have more energy than the old ones who decided, no, just it will come. We'll ask the United States, we'll ask Europe to help us, we'll ask the UN to help us, we ask the Arab leaders to help us. I said, no. Okay, we have to help ourselves. We are under occupation, and we have to resist. But for me, I told them I have to resist through nonviolence means. My father died. He was shot when I was 5 years old, and my mother told me very flat, don't carry a gun. Don't shoot anybody. The one who shot your dad doesn't know that he left me as a widow with 7 kids. So that becomes energetic in me to say to the Palestinians, there is other way. This is the way that we have. But the other way, you have to work on it. You have to go and write and translate and make lectures, go to refugee camps, go to villages, and not only once, at least 3 times, 4 times, to say that you could do it and find what their need is. and help them with whatever their need is. You have to build a very good relationship and strong relationship. And don't worry if young people have guns. Get them in and talk to them. And those people who have guns are people who want to fight. And we have to teach them how to fight other than carrying a gun. And here is the whole concept of nonviolence, is changing those people who have the guns to use a nonviolence method. So that becomes, and then don't stop there. You have to go to the leadership of the Palestinians and talk to them and talk to them and talk to them and convince them that nonviolence works better. Mm-hmm. And we did that. And we did that with the children, with women, with elderly people, with young people, with everybody. And everybody start at least saying nonviolence. It's an okay, it's a try. You know, in the beginning, it was a dirty word. And now, whatever you said now, there's so many groups who believe in peace, who believe in nonviolence, that it's amazing. And that was the seeds. We just put seeds there. Mm-hmm. The ones that we started the Intifada. And I didn't do it by myself. We have other people who help in that. But when the trees are being uprooted, what we did, we went and planted. If they uproot 100 trees, we plant 1,000 trees. We refuse to pay taxes. We refuse to eat and drink anything made in Israel. We have to eat and drink local products. And we resisted paying even the water bill, the utility bills, because all the bills comes to us in Hebrew, and we are Arabs. And then after that, then the Israelis start sending us the bills in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. But we start gaining a little bit. However, whatever we gain, it was a triumph for us. And also, we find out that, like Evan, he find that in the army, not everybody support the leader there, that some of them can change. And we find a lot of Israelis, they can change. They start coming to our meetings. They start planting trees with us. They start saying, Israel is not really need that occupation of Palestinians. Mm-hmm. We can work together. And that is difficult for a young Palestinian to accept until they work together with Israelis and Palestinians together for that. Mm-hmm. But it was successful. And we have to convince Arafat in that time that two-state solution will work, that he have to go back and live in Palestine, in Ramallah, in Gaza, in Jericho, that the United States saying we have to recognize the PLO. You know, many things came because of the Intifada, and the Israelis find it difficult to continue oppressing, hitting, destroying, killing, and deporting, and destroying homes. At what time they want to destroy every Palestinian, they cannot do it. Till now, we feel we are victorious, even under all the aspect of the Israeli, what they are doing. The resistance continue even in Gaza, which is seized, and nobody can leave Gaza. You know, we have Palestine as a country. We don't have an airport. We don't have a port for the ships. We have all kind of difficulties in going from one place to another. We have checkpoints. They make it more difficult. Oh, yes. They build a wall. But that did not deter the Palestinians that we are interested in being free. And we don't want to be under occupation.
There have been so many wars since your peaceful Intifada that it's really hard for me to say, yes, you've won. You feel victorious.
We feel very victorious on that. However, we cannot control everybody. Mm. And I brought Gene Sharp to talk to those people with guns. And I told them, put your guns away and talk. Here is a fellow who always believed in nonviolence. And Gene was so interested in talking to those people that he told them that the gun is for the weak person. If you believe in nonviolence, you have to be stronger. And after his talk, we have several people with the guns. They say, we are not going to touch a gun. And they find it difficult to use nonviolence method. But then you have to train them, you have to educate them. We have to use the kind of spirituality that everybody is part of God, is a child of God. And if you are religion, doesn't matter what your religion is, you don't kill a person because you kill part of God in that way of doing it. And that work in a religious group, religious people.
They're just now evacuating Mariupol in Ukraine. And I mean, those people have no possible way of defending themselves against the shells and the bombs and that sort of thing. I mean, if I were there, I can't imagine saying, well, just leave us alone and let them go ahead and kill us, because we can't defend ourselves, but we don't want you to shoot down the planes that are bombing us, etc., because they're children of God in those planes. That's, an unusual point of view. And it's really hard in this. I can understand a situation where a country is being occupied and the people there want to resist nonviolently and do all the things that you were doing in Palestine, and all the things that Ivan was doing in Serbia against Milosevic. The resisting the government is that's the logical thing to do. But if somebody comes out, you're walking down the street with your child and somebody comes out with a baseball bat and starts beating up your child, my assumption is that you do anything you can to stop him. And that's just, to stand there and say, well, go ahead and beat him up is, we don't think that way.
I've been thinking of that so much. I think that the population, the Russian population, have to wake up, have to grow up, have to be in the streets, have to block all the tanks from going any place. They are the one who could make the change. They are the one who could stop the war. And they are not doing it.
That's right. They sure
Either
not.
they don't have the knowledge, or they have the information wrong, or they don't have organization. That all organization have been all military organization. They are unapproachable in the military, but they are the ones who could stop it. And it's not only one day or one moment or on weekend they will fill the streets. They have to do it on a daily basis to stop that. They have to fill the Moscow streets on a daily basis, that they don't have a car going any place or a tank going any place.
I'm afraid you're right. And there is the big puzzle for me, knowing so many Russians and finding a kind of passivity there, an acceptance of domination that puzzles me. But of course, they're not the only people in the world who love their dictators. I mean, Gene Sharp once said to me, people love their dictators. A lot of people really want to be bullied and coerced and dominated. And I think that's probably the only explanation I can think of for the situation where the Russians are not at all protesting.
I think another side of that story is actually the Ukrainians. And so, and I think what you pointed earlier, like with the how to say that example of somebody coming over with a baseball bat. I think Ukrainians are the ones who are looking at the Russian soldier with the baseball bat in that sense. So can they abandon how to say armed struggle and say, oh, let's resist the Russian invasion non-violently? And here the question is not, I think, what they should do, but what they can do. And we've noticed that this is not a hypothetical. This is what we've seen. There were certain towns like Kherson, for instance, that were taken over by Russians. And what did they do? When they broke through the Ukrainian defenses and they managed to occupy town, what did the Ukrainians do in those towns? They resisted the Russian soldiers non-violently. So they would block their vehicles, they would stand up and prevent them from moving, from how shall I say, implementing their occupational plan or whatever they were trying to do, and they pretty much disrupted the Russian forces in that. So it's not that the Ukrainians there decided not to use arms, but they didn't have access to arms. These were civilians who were left in those cities when the Ukrainian army was pushed out. And so they were thinking, when we don't have arms, does this mean that we surrender? No, that means that we can still continue the struggle and do it non-violently. And they did it to a great success. So in many of these places, they actually managed to, how shall I say, disrupt the activities of the Russian occupying force.
But isn't Kherson under Russian control now?
It is. And the question is not whether the occupation is happening, but as Mubarak said earlier, is it effective? The occupiers are going to occupy, but through civil resistance and through nonviolent action, civilians can make that occupation less effective. And this is, the least they can do, since they are not the army and they cannot resist militarily. So it's not the question of like, what should we do, but what is it that we can do? As and this is the thing. In these instances, old people who are not physically fit, people who don't have military training, they can still contribute to the struggle for freedom and against occupation by not cooperating with the occupier. And examples dating back to like what the Danish did during the Second World War, and what the Mubarak and the Palestinians did, they show us that people who resist occupation non-violently are much larger group than those who have access to guns, who have training and skills that are needed for armed struggle. And Ukrainians, not just in the last couple of months, but when we look at dating back to Ukraine without Kuchma protests in 2000 and 2001, Orange Revolution in 2004, the Maidan in 2014, they showed time and time again that they are capable of using nonviolent action, and they really showed the world that that they can do that, and they keep showing that even today, which doesn't mean again saying that they abandoned armed struggle. I mean, they still have a country that is fighting back. They have an army, and like, who on earth is going to say that one should abandon their own army and their own country? But when these defenses fail, if the Russians manage to break through, they still keep fighting with other means.
Okay, that's the position that I took early in the war. That is, the first few days when I believed that the Russians were going to zip right in and take over Kiev and control the whole country, and that there would be no resistance to speak of. So at that point, what I believed should happen, and I even said it on various talk shows, is if I were Zelensky, I'd say, well, come on in. We can't stop you. Make yourself at home, but you have to realize we're not going to cooperate with you. And you're not going to be able to get us to cooperate or to obey you. You can occupy the whole country, but everybody here, there are too many of us, and we're not going to cooperate. So with that kind of, he would have saved a hell of a lot of lives by saying, okay, call it surrender, if you will. We surrender, but we're not going to really surrender because we're not going to obey you. I think that might have worked at the time, but of course, he thought he could win militarily, and he pretty much demonstrated that he may. Probably, I don't know what the odds are now.
I don't think that was the case. I don't think he thought that they could win, because nobody can know that beforehand. I think he knew they had a chance.
Mhm.
And he kind of assumed that. But here is the thing why he couldn't say, here it is, I'm just going to surrender, and and then make non-cooperation the main strategy. First, the problem of surrender is that there were enough people inside Ukraine who were willing to jump on the bandwagon of Russian occupation. And these would be collaborators. We saw during the Second World War, all countries except Poland had the Quislings. They had collaborators willing to step in and do the bidding of the occupying force. So if you surrender, that doesn't mean that non-cooperation is going to be automatic. There can be part of the population that, how shall I say, sides with the occupier, and especially like members of like certain elites that have financial interests in Russia would be kind of, let's say, Medvedchuk, who was one of the tycoons, one of the oligarchs, very close to Kuchma and to Yanukovych. He would be one of them to step in. When they resisted the Russian occupation or the Russian invasion, when they, how shall I say, used the armed struggle through like regular military that they had, they also showed the real face of Russia. Like, what is Russia capable of doing, which pretty much undermined anybody who was thinking about siding with the occupier, because anybody who, how should I say, had any pro-Russian sentiment before the war, that sentiment was gone because of how Russia conducted this war. And in a sense, it now Zelensky has that, how shall I say, claim supported by evidence that Russian occupation is a total disaster, which in case of surrender, you kind of lose that argument because you're just accepting it. So in a sense, I am a big proponent of civil resistance. I'm a big proponent of nonviolent action, but I would never say that nonviolent action is something that just should be used without thinking. I think that it should be a result of strategic analysis. When we look at like how things are, what is it that we can do, what is it that we can expect, then we choose it. But if we just say we're going to use it no matter what, that means that we really didn't think about it, and that undermines our own argument for nonviolent action.
Okay, where would you work if you were Zelensky today with the options that we think are available? What would be your policy?
I mean, how should I say? I really would refrain from making any kind of specific, how should I say, policy recommendations.
I lie awake at night thinking, if it were up to me, what would I do? And I think I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, that is true. But I think really that some of the things that he did, that I would, instead of saying this is what I would do, I would just point to some of the things that he did, which I think are brilliant and really change the way this conflict might play out. For instance, one of the things is welcoming Russian defectors. So what does that mean? There is even like a unit of Russian defectors that is fighting under the Ukrainian command. They're called the Free Russia Legion. So what does that mean? That means that he is actually, by establishing that, he's saying, we are not at war with the Russian people. Those Russian soldiers who understand that what Putin has done is wrong, and they're willing to remedy that by defecting, they're going to be welcomed.
Well, now I'm glad you said that, because I've said several times, the thing they should do is drop leaflets on all these tanks that were stalled in a convoy and say, come on over, guys, we will take good care of you. But other people said, no. First of all, they're not doing that. I don't know whether maybe you say they did do it, but if they did, then the people at home, these guys had families, and those guys back in Russia would suffer. Their families would suffer.
But
So
also,
I don't know. What do you think, Mubarak? You're saying
also another thing that I don't think that the United States and Europe are really seriously thinking of not having casualty there. They are not seeing that as an importance. Life is an important thing that they could stop it immediately. And they are willing to put money and weapons to continue, because not a Swiss or a German or a French or an American is dying. So they are willing to give and give and give because nobody is dying there. And that is very sad. And the people over there have to understand we cannot continue asking just for weapons and being killed. That's one thing. One thing that in the Intifada, what happened, we were planning to make it difficult for the Israeli, for example. And during the months and years of the Intifada, there's 8,000 Israeli soldiers have to control us, 8,000. So they took the soldiers from the borders of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, everywhere. And it was very difficult, even Israel is a small country with small army, but to continue that, it was a disaster for Israel. And we know it, and we continue seeing that disaster, and not like anytime it's only this city or that. Every city, every refugee camp, every village have something in the Intifada, and they did it, which is fantastic, which is beautiful. And they have to have, instead of one Jeep in a village, they have to have trucks and Jeeps and to put it under curfew, and that take more and more soldiers. And if a village had put the Palestinian flag and no soldiers were there, we start calling the Israeli, what's going on with you? The village is free and you have to go back and get the flag down. You know, we have the upper hand. And then imagine if you have in the occupation, have a little bit of upper hand, then it's a fantastic thing. So you have to understand, you have to deal with the enemy, you have to work with the enemy. But unfortunately, we don't have many people who can go to Russia, speak to the Russian people everywhere, and speak to Ukrainian everywhere also.
you were listing the things that Zelensky has done, and what's number two?
Yes, he had several addresses in Russian for the Russian audience. So he is thinking about that. And that is actually really important, because there is no way that Ukraine can militarily defeat Russia. That is just, how shall I say, these are two different levels of military, how shall I say, capability. But he understands there that, you know, if support for the war in Russia goes down, the war is going to be much easier to end. So rather than thinking, should we do it through negotiations? Should we do it through this or through that channel? Thinking about what is the level of support for war in Russia is actually opening the opportunity for either negotiated agreement or, you know, troop pullout or whatever. But that is why his strategic thinking is I think on track of, like, you know, and really looking in the right direction. And that is something that I wanted to point out, because, you know, Mubarak is right. The way the West is involved in this war is indirectly just by supporting Ukrainians, and Ukrainians don't want to be a proxy. They need to kind of think about, you know, how do they think about their own interests, more right than wrong, I have to say. And I just think that, you know, that is something that will be probably studied in years to come, and that is Zelensky's strategic decisions and everything that he has done.
Fascinating. Okay, this has been so rewarding, and God bless those guys. Let's hope somebody can figure out a peaceful solution, and you've given us some tips. Thank you both. I've enjoyed this too much. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more, and this is episode number 455. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. When you get to that website, look around. We have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts with the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.